All right. Ready to dive into something pretty incredible.
Ready.
We're talking about your body's own cannabis system.
Whoa.
Yeah, you heard that right. The endocannabinoid system,
I
or ECS for short.
got it.
It's this network of receptors and compounds that your body makes naturally.
Hmm.
And they play like a huge role in just like keeping you feeling good, keeping everything working right.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. When you say cannabis system, people might think of,
Yeah, getting high.
exactly.
Sure.
But this is so much more than that. It's
Right.
really about this intricate balance in your body.
So we're talking about how our bodies regulate, like pain,
Yes.
mood swings, even inflammation, all that stuff.
Absolutely. The ECS is involved in a surprisingly wide range of things.
So it's kind of like this control center behind the scenes.
You got it. Working constantly to keep things running smoothly.
You sent over some research, and it looks like we'll be diving into how this system can go wrong in diseases like Alzheimer's,
Yeah.
Parkinson's, and how scientists are figuring out how to,
Manipulate it.
for treatment.
Yeah. It's a really exciting field right now. Tons of possibilities.
Okay, so let's break it down.
Sure.
What exactly this ECS, and how does it do all this?
So imagine like these tiny receptors
Okay,
all over your body, just sitting on the surface of your cells,
got it.
waiting for a signal.
Okay,
These are cannabinoid receptors, and there's two main types, CB1 and CB2.
so they're like locks waiting for the right key to unlock them.
Exactly. And the keys are compounds called endocannabinoids.
Endocannabinoids.
Yeah, your body's own cannabis-like molecules.
Our bodies are making cannabis-like molecules.
You got it.
That's wild.
It is. And the two main ones are anandamide, AEA for short,
Okay.
and 2-arachidonyl glycerol. We'll just call it 2AG.
2D, got it.
Those endocannabinoids bind to those receptors we talked about.
CB1 and CB2,
Yep, and they trigger a whole bunch of effects.
depending on which receptor it is and where they bind. This is a pretty complex system.
It is.
What are some of the, the main things that the ECS is responsible for regulating?
Well, one of the big ones is inflammation.
Okay.
When you get hurt or sick,
Right.
the ECS helps control that inflammatory response.
Like an internal fire extinguisher.
Exactly, keeping that inflammation from getting out of control.
So it's all about balance.
Yeah.
What about pain? How does the ECS work with that?
It plays a big role, actually, in how you perceive pain,
Okay.
like how intense the pain signals are and how they travel through your nervous system.
It's like a volume knob for pain.
Yeah, exactly. Fine-tuning how you experience it.
That's so interesting.
Right.
This system is really powerful.
It is.
I was reading that the ECS is also involved in mood,
Absolutely. It modulates neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin.
which are like the mood regulators, right?
Exactly. That's why the ECS is thought to be involved in anxiety, depression.
So our emotional well-being is tied into this system too.
Yeah, pretty much everything is interconnected in the body.
What about our movement? How does the ECS affect that?
Well, the ECS is also found in parts of the brain that control motor function,
Okay.
like the basal ganglia and the cerebellum.
Got it.
It affects the neurotransmitters that control movement.
So it helps with coordination, balance.
Yep. And even fine motor skills.
We've talked about inflammation, pain, mood, and movement.
It's a busy system.
That's already a lot for one system to be responsible for.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the ECS can get messed up in certain diseases.
Right. And when it malfunctions, that's when you start to see problems.
Look at disruption in that balance.
Exactly.
You sent some stuff about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Yeah, those are two big ones.
So the ECS might be playing a role in those,
Absolutely.
along with others like Huntington's,
Right. Research suggests that a messed up ECS can make symptoms worse.
and potentially even contribute to the disease progressing. So can you tell us more about like how the ECS is involved in each of those diseases?
Sure.
Like starting with Alzheimer's.
Okay, so in Alzheimer's, there seems to be a decrease in CB1 receptor activity.
In the brain.
Yeah, in specific areas, especially those involved in memory and learning.
So if those receptors aren't working right, it could affect how our brains make and retrieve memories.
That's the thinking.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
What about Parkinson's? What's happening with the ECS there?
Parkinson's is a little more complicated.
Okay.
Studies suggest that early on in the disease, CB1 receptors might actually be downregulated.
Downregulated meaning like less active,
Exactly.
and that might contribute to like brain cells dying.
Right, specifically dopamine-producing neurons.
And dopamine is super important for movement.
It's crucial.
So if those neurons are dying, that leads to those movement problems.
Yeah, that's one of the hallmarks of Parkinson's.
So in both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, we're seeing changes in the ECS.
Yeah, although the specifics might differ.
What about Huntington's disease? How does the ECS come into play there?
Well, in Huntington's, there's evidence of a reduction in both CB1 receptors AND endocannabinoid levels.
In certain parts of the brain.
Exactly.
And this could be contributing to those movement problems, cognitive decline, even psychiatric issues that are often seen with Huntington's.
That's the current thinking.
It's incredible to think that one system, the ECS, could be involved in so many different neurological disorders.
It's amazing, and it's why researchers are so interested in targeting the ECS for treatment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If we can understand how it's malfunctioning, maybe we can figure out how to adjust it,
To relieve symptoms or even slow the progression of these diseases.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a really exciting area of research, a lot of potential there.
So from what I've been reading, scientists are looking at a few main strategies for manipulating the ECS.
Right.
Can you explain those?
Sure. So one approach is to use medications that act as either agonists or antagonists.
Okay, hold on. Agonists and antagonists. Let's break that down.
Okay.
Agonists would basically mimic those endocannabinoids, right?
Exactly. They bind to the receptors and activate them.
Producing similar effects to AEA or 2-AG.
Yeah.
And antagonists would do the opposite.
Right. They block the receptors.
So it's like putting a stop sign up, preventing those endocannabinoids from binding.
Exactly.
So we have tools to either boost or block the activity of the ECS.
Right.
Depending on what we want to achieve.
That's the idea.
What are some examples of how these strategies are being used?
Well, going back to those neurological disorders we talked about.
Alzheimer's, Parkinson's?
Yeah, research on Alzheimer's is showing that modulating the ECS could be a really promising way to address the disease.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So preclinical studies suggest that certain cannabinoids might actually reduce the buildup of those harmful amyloid plaques.
Those are one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's.
Right, exactly.
So by targeting the ECS, we might be able to slow down the progression of the disease or even prevent more damage from happening.
That's what researchers are hoping for.
And it goes beyond just reducing the plaques, right?
Right. There's also research looking at whether cannabinoids can protect brain cells from the toxic effects of those plaques.
So it's a two-pronged approach.
Exactly. Reduce the plaques and shield the brain from their damage.
Are there any clinical trials happening looking into this?
Yeah, there are some ongoing trials investigating the use of cannabinoids for treating Alzheimer's symptoms.
Okay.
Early results look promising, but we need more research to figure out the right doses, the best treatment plans.
Makes sense. It's still early,
Yeah,
but the potential is there.
definitely.
What about Parkinson's? Any similar research happening there?
Yeah, with Parkinson's, the focus is on how modulating the ECS could impact those movement problems.
Tremors, stiffness, all that.
Exactly. Some studies suggest that certain cannabinoids might help improve those motor symptoms.
And that's by influencing dopamine signaling, right?
Yeah, because dopamine is crucial for movement control.
And it's severely depleted in Parkinson's.
Right, so by influencing those dopamine pathways, we might be able to provide some relief from those movement problems.
That's amazing.
It is.
Are there trials for that too?
Yeah, there are a few early-stage trials using cannabinoids for Parkinson's symptoms,
Okay.
mainly focusing on managing those motor symptoms
Right.
and also non-motor symptoms like sleep problems and anxiety.
So we've talked about using agonists and antagonists to target the ECS.
Right.
Are there other things scientists are trying?
Yeah, remember those enzymes that break down endocannabinoids?
Uh-huh.
Researchers are looking at ways to inhibit those enzymes.
So instead of directly messing with the receptors,
Right.
we could increase the levels of our own endocannabinoids.
Exactly, by stopping them from being broken down.
That's really clever.
It is.
And what are the potential benefits of that? Any risks?
Well, the research is still pretty new.
Okay.
But some studies suggest that inhibiting endocannabinoid degradation could be helpful for things like chronic pain, anxiety, and even some neurodegenerative diseases.
So another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, exactly.
This is all very exciting stuff.
It is, but of course we need more research to fully understand the long-term effects.
Right, and any potential risks.
Exactly. It's a complex system. We need to be careful.
Makes sense. Safety first.
Always.
But even with those cautions, the potential here is really remarkable.
It is.
It's like we have this whole toolbox of ways to adjust the ECS.
Yeah.
Agonist, antagonist, enzyme inhibitors.
I like that. A toolbox?
It really highlights how complex and how potentially powerful this system is.
It does.
We've talked about how problems with the ECS can lead to diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's.
Right.
and now we're exploring different ways to target it for treatment.
Right.
But before we wrap up, I want to take a closer look at those two main cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2.
Okay.
Can you remind us what makes them different and what they do in the body?
Sure. So CB1 receptors are mostly found in the brain and central nervous system. They're key players in things like mood, memory, how you perceive pain, and motor function.
So CB1 is like the ECS control center for the brain.
You could say that.
What about CB2?
CB2 receptors are more concentrated in the immune system,
Okay.
especially in cells involved in inflammation.
So CB1 is brain and nervous system. CB2 is immune function.
Right.
That's a fascinating division of labor.
It is, and understanding that is crucial for developing targeted therapies.
So if we want to affect brain function, we target CB1.
Right.
But if we want to modulate the immune response, CB2 would be a better target.
Exactly.
So what happens when these receptors are activated? Like, what are the specific effects of activating CB1 versus CB2?
Well, activating CB1 can produce a lot of different effects depending on where in the brain it's happening.
Okay.
We're talking about reducing anxiety, decreasing pain perception, affecting appetite, even influencing memory formation.
That's a lot.
It is.
What about CB2?
Activating CB2 is mainly thought to modulate immune responses
Okay.
and reduce inflammation. That's why CB2 is being explored as a potential target for things like chronic pain and inflammatory diseases.
So CB1 is more about regulating brain function and behavior.
Yeah.
And CB2 is more focused on the immune system and inflammation.
Right. They both have crucial roles, but in different areas.
Exactly.
And both types of receptors can actually be targeted by compounds found in the cannabis plant.
Like THC and CBD.
Exactly.
So now we're getting to the cannabis part of the endocannabinoid system.
Right, but it's important to remember that our bodies make their own cannabinoids too.
Right, our endocannabinoids
Exactly. And both types, those from our body and those from the plant.
can interact with CB1 and CB2.
Exactly, and trigger all sorts of effects.
It's like there are these two different radio stations in the body.
Okay.
And these cannabinoids, whether they're from inside or outside, can tune into those stations
I like that analogy.
and change what's playing.
It's a good way to visualize it.
And understanding that interplay is super important for developing safe and effective therapies that target the ECS.
Absolutely.
So we've got these receptors, CB1 in the brain, CB2 in the immune system.
Right. Yeah.
They can be activated by endocannabinoids, our own, and phytocannabinoids from plants.
Right.
And we're starting to understand how we can manipulate all of that for treatment.
We're getting there.
It's all starting to make sense.
That's good.
Before we move on, was there any particular research finding that really stood out to you from all the stuff we reviewed?
Yeah, there was one study that I thought was really interesting about the neuroprotective potential of anandamide.
Anandamide, one of our own endocannabinoids.
Right. This study found that anandamide can actually inhibit an enzyme called NOX2.
NOX2, remind me what that is.
It's involved in producing those reactive oxygen species that damage cells.
Oh, right, especially in the brain.
Exactly. They're like little troublemakers causing oxidative stress.
And damage.
Yeah.
So anandamide is protecting brain cells from that damage.
Exactly. By inhibiting NOX2, it acts like a shield against that oxidative stress.
That's incredible.
It is, and this is particularly important for age-related decline.
And neurodegenerative diseases.
Exactly.
So boosting anandamide levels could potentially protect our brains.
That's the idea, and there are different ways to potentially do that.
Like what?
Well, for example, certain compounds can inhibit the transporter that removes anandamide from the synapses.
So it stays around longer.
Exactly, making it more available.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It is.
So we're not just talking about manipulating the receptors, but also influencing the levels of these key endocannabinoids.
Right. It's a multifaceted approach.
It's all so amazingly intricate and interconnected.
It really is.
Yeah, it really is. You know, it makes you appreciate how complex our bodies are.
It really does.
So we've been talking about this endocannabinoid system,
Right.
how it can be like adjusted for treating different things.
Yeah.
But I want to switch gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about something I know a lot of listeners are probably wondering about,
Okay.
which is plant-derived cannabinoids,
Right.
like THC and CBD.
Makes sense.
So how does THC, that psychoactive component of cannabis, how does that fit into all this?
Well, THC mostly works by binding to those CB1 receptors.
The ones mostly in the brain,
Exactly. The ones in the brain and central nervous system.
which explains why it has those effects on mood,
Yeah.
perception, even thinking.
Right. It's basically like a key from an outside source
Mm-hmm.
that fits into those CB1 locks,
Interesting.
kind of hijacking the system a bit.
And producing a bunch of effects.
Some good, some not so good.
What about CBD?
Okay.
It's often talked about for its, therapeutic benefits.
Right.
But without that high that THC causes, how does that work?
CBD is a really interesting compound.
Mm.
It doesn't bind to CB1 as strongly as THC does.
Okay.
And it actually works more by influencing the activity of both CB1 and CB2.
Indirectly.
Yeah, indirect.
So it's less of a key
Right.
and more of a tuning knob for the ECS.
I like that, yeah.
So that's why it's being looked at for so many different conditions.
Right, from anxiety to epilepsy.
Chronic pain, inflammation.
All sorts of things.
It's fascinating how all these different cannabinoids from our bodies
Right.
and from plants can interact with the ECS in such different ways.
It really is. It shows how complex and adaptable this system is.
This has been a really great deep dive.
It has.
We've learned a lot from the basics of the ECS to its role in health and disease
Right.
and all those potential ways we can use it for treatment.
It's been a pleasure talking about all this with you.
Before we wrap up,
Okay.
one last question.
Sure.
We've been talking about all these medications and compounds that interact with the ECS.
Right.
But are there things we can do, in our everyday lives, that might affect this system too?
That's a great question, and it's something researchers are looking into.
Okay.
Some studies suggest that a diet high in omega-3 fatty acids might be helpful.
Omega-3s, those healthy fats in fish, right?
It's exactly salmon, things like that.
So those might support a healthy ECS.
That's the thinking. Yeah, they might be important for making endocannabinoids.
Interesting.
And they could also affect those enzymes involved in endocannabinoid metabolism.
So what we eat could actually have an impact on the ECS.
It seems possible.
And there's also research about exercise, right?
Yeah, some evidence suggests that exercise might boost endocannabinoid levels.
Really?
Yeah, especially in anandamide.
Wow. So we can actually influence this system through the things we do every day.
It seems that way, which just shows how important a holistic approach to health is.
Right. Thinking about diet, exercise, stress management, all of it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks.
Right.
Our deep dive into the endocannabinoid system.
Fascinating stuff.
It's complex, for sure, but hopefully we've shed some light on how amazing it is.
I think we did.
And all the potential it holds.
Definitely.
And for those of you who want to keep learning about the ECS, I highly recommend checking out Rafi's Linktree. It's Linktree/Autochtons.
Okay.
You can find a PDF copy of the book we used for this episode.
Great resource.
It's packed with great info. It'll keep your brain busy for a while.
For sure.
All right. Keep learning, keep exploring, keep asking questions about your amazing bodies.
Absolutely.
You never know what you might discover.
That's the truth.
Until next time, fellow deep divers.